those who mourn shall be comforted. What I like about that is it makes sense. It's consonant with Jesus' picture of the kingdom. And if we understand the word that way, good news, those who mourn shall be comforted, it becomes consistent with the very first message that Jesus delivered as an adult. Luke's gospel in the 4th chapter says that Jesus came to synagogue one day. It was his hometown congregation. And he came to worship and he sat down and somebody handed him the scroll of Scripture to read that day. It's your turn. And he turned in the Isaiah scroll to chapter 61 and he looked at his brothers and his sisters, his mother and his father, and those who were his family in faith. And he said, "The Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is upon me. For He has anointed me to preach gospel, to preach good news to the poor, to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim freedom for the captives and release from darkness for the prisoners, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor and the day of vengeance for our God, to comfort all who mourn, and to provide for those in Zion who grieve, to bestow upon them a crown of beauty instead of ashes, the oil of gladness instead of mourning, a garment of praise instead of despair. They shall be called oaks of righteousness, a planting of the Lord for the display of His splendor." Do you hear it? And the very first word that Jesus offered to us, what He said about the kingdom that was coming through Him is, this is the way it's going to work. It's going to be the way my Father put creation together in the first place. In the kingdom that I am bringing, those who mourn will be comforted. That is the way God designed creation to work. It's not a new word. It's not a change in direction that Jesus brought onto the scene late in the game. It's not even a word that Isaiah picked up in the middle of the game. Jesus said it's a first word. This is the way God put the world together. How can that be? What's the most basic thing we know about God? Our simplest definition. The thing even our children hear and understand. God is love. That's where we start. Everything else builds from that. Because God is love in grace, God created. God created to give something of Himself, not to get something for Himself. And what grief we have brought to God and what love He has responded to us with ever since. God is love. Now let's think about mourning. When do we mourn? Every occasion of mourning is also an occasion of loving. We love someone or we love something, blankie or your brother, it doesn't really matter. You love someone or you love something, and then something that is untoward happens to the beloved and we grieve. It is a basic principle of grieving that in order to grieve, we must first have enlarged the circle of our concern beyond ourselves. And when you make a bigger circle, you've got a bigger target. It's just that simple. No longer am I only concerned about myself. I'm not the only one about whom I worry. If you hurt, then I hurt. The clearest and simplest definition of love that I know is what happens to you makes a difference to me. When we love, of course, our lives become better, richer, fuller, larger, more expansive, more inclusive. God looked out at the creation that He made from the beginning and He said, it's good, it's very, very good. And He said, oh, look, that's not good. It's not good to be alone. Indeed, when we open our lives through love, they become bigger, richer, fuller, more wonderful, and more open to pain. Therefore, all mourners are lovers. If you never loved, you'd never mourn. If you didn't care, there'd be no opportunity for injury, no cause for pain. All mourners are lovers. And the flip of that is equally true. All lovers are potential mourners. Because as soon as someone or something becomes so important to you that you open your heart and your life to them, you've opened your life not only to enrichment, but also to pain. Mourning is always based in the experience of love. You can't have the one without also having the other. And the reality is, some people who have made that connection between loving and mourning have decided that the possibility of pain is so great, so painful, so frightening that they decide, I'm not going to take the risk. And the easiest path to avoiding that risk is simply not to love in the first place. Not to make a connection with anyone else. I'm a rock. I am an island. I'm going to be concerned about the unholy trinity of me, myself, and I, and let the world go its way. And if you can avoid loving, you will effectively eliminate the possible risk of mourning. You will effectively eliminate the possibility of danger, the dangerous possibility of pain coming to you from others in your life. And there are whole religious systems that are built on that idea. That's the fundamental principle behind Buddhism. You know how Buddhism came to be? It's a very wealthy king. He was in his age, and he had a son. And he'd known enough about the world and its pain that he didn't want his son to have any of the pain of the world. And he was wealthy enough, he thought he could shield his son from all that pain. He decreed that his son would be raised in castle and courtyard. And everything that might bring him pain would be kept away. Growing up, he never saw poverty. He never saw hunger. He never saw a diseased person. He never saw an old person. His life was surrounded by beauty and grace and love, people who were compassionate toward him and toward whom he could show compassion. But you can't keep somebody locked up their whole life. And one night in his adolescence, curious about the world around him, the Buddha and one of his companions climbed over the wall of the courtyard and went out into the world. Can you imagine the shock that created? Somebody said overprotected children are underprepared for the world, and that's right. They're like hothouse flowers. They're fine and beautiful in the delicate confine of the hothouse, but they're not ready for the temperature variation of the garden. And here he was, as a young man, confronted for the first time with starvation, with poverty. He had been surrounded only by youth and agility, and he saw the crippling effect of age and work on people. And it was overwhelming. He drew back in himself. He was numbed by it. And he began a quest to find a way to live in this world of pain. He went to spiritual master after spiritual master, seeking some way to find in this world that is filled with pain that would make sense. And then one day, he was sitting under a lotus tree, that is to this day the symbol of that faith, and he achieved his enlightenment. He realized the problem is, as long as I have concern or compassion for someone outside of myself, I'm at risk of being in pain. But if I could detach myself, if I could have no concern for what happens around me, I would be safe. My life would be immune from that kind of pain. He conceived of what he called nirvana, which literally means to blow out the candle. If I could blow out my concern like blowing out a candle and not care for anyone else, then I'd be safe. I read one Buddhist who said, you should so order your life that if your wife and children were to die tonight, it wouldn't matter to you. That's the end and the being of their faith. Basic to Buddhism is this idea, if we could disconnect from other people, if we could put a wall between us and them, we would effectively avoid the danger of pain in our lives. But I tell you, that has never been the basis of biblical faith. Read it cover to cover. You won't find a word of detachment, you'll find a word of connection. The psalmist said, delight yourself in the Lord and He will give you the desires of your heart. One of the great Baptist pastors of the last century was Carlisle Marney, and Carlisle Marney paraphrased the psalmist this way, delight yourself in the Lord and He will fix your wanter. That is, when you delight yourself in the Lord, He will so redeem and remake your heart that you will want for things that will in fact be blessing in your life. God will help you to want the right things. What Buddha says is He will abolish your wanter. He will destroy your desire to be connected altogether. And when you see images of the Buddha to this day, there he is sitting serenely, hands in a posture of meditation with his eyes closed. And it is a deliberate point being made that the Buddha is closed to anyone or anything that is outside of him, attachment to which could bring him pain in life.